Welcome, everybody, to the Pat and Mike Show. Today's topic is trust administration. And this topic comes to us because we're getting so many questions, it seems, lately about what does it look like to administer a trust. So we wanted to just bring on our attorney expert, Kendra Rozboril, to kind of, let's talk it through. Let's walk through what trust administration looks like. And by trust administration, we mean the process of the person who originally set up the plan, maybe the trust, has now passed away, and there's triggering events and distribution of assets and things that need to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it really is that what happens now that we have this trust in place, and what do we do with the assets? The assets
Right.
have been tied. We've gone through the funding process. Okay, so now what do we do? And there's a lot of things that need to be done, really. Most trusts, though, have some great language in them, some guiding points in an article, hopefully, that kind of spell out some of those, but some of those aren't as clear. And successor trustees always need to be aware that, they have a duty not just to themselves, but also the beneficiaries. So, going through that process can sometimes be a little daunting to some people. So
is it like, all I do as successor trustee, meaning the person who's going to take care of all this, I just write a couple checks, to whoever the beneficiaries are? It's that simple, right?
I mean, it can be. There are some things that you have to do as successor trustee, and distributions are one of them. But another being that you have to do everything to wrap up the person's estate. You have to pay creditors. You have to let the creditors know that this person's passed. You need to be maybe selling a residence or doing an estate sale. There's just things that there's just little things that add up along the way, that it's not just cutting a check. Now, someone may have just liquid assets, no real estate. You do kind of get a little more off the hook in those instances of having to do extra work, but you still are going through the process of cleaning everything up. So then all you have to do at the end is cut a check.
Gotcha. Yeah. Go ahead, Pat.
No, I was just going to say, so I know we get asked this question a whole lot is, there's what the law says has to happen. And then there's kind of the practical reality of what that actually looks like. So the law is as straightforward as do an inventory, which is, hey, what does the estate have? Do an accounting, what are the expenses of the estate and who's getting them? And then you make those distributions. But in reality, we're talking about someone's entire life. We're talking about everything that they've acquired through that time, and it's not always that simple.
Exactly. Some of our trust cases that we work on with families, they can become very time intensive in terms of those inventory and accountings and getting everything, together. We have a lot of families we work with where the individual who passed away, was basically their own financial advisor, and they had 10, 20 accounts at all different places. Well, now you were the one responsible as successor trustee to get those liquidated into the trust, whatever that means. And now you're dealing with tax applications, income taxes. And it's the same, though, if you were to be doing it through probate. This way, though, you don't have the court oversight, really. You just have the beneficiaries there to be put on notice. So you're doing all the same things, but you're still having to go through the steps of getting the money to the beneficiaries.
So, and as you said, it's a similar process with a trust or with probate, but there's some pretty significant differences as well. I mean, if you're doing that inventory and an accounting, that makes a lot of sense. You have to know what there is and who it's going to. But with a trust, you're responsible to yourself, the trustee, the intentions of the person who set it up, and then the beneficiaries, the people who are getting the assets. And in most cases, that's you and your siblings. I mean, I would say that's 80-90% of the trusts that we set up. It's going to the kids. Even though the process, or the purpose, I should say, is pretty similar, pretty different between administering a trust and going through probate. Would you say?
I would add to that also, Pat, the fees that the court will end up charging on the inventory of the estate. the approval that you have to get when it comes to selling real estate, or sometimes, other things require court approval where you can't just act, to wrap up the estate. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement, Pat, that there's, although similar, quite different.
Yeah. And I think one of the first things that someone would notice if they're in this position, the biggest difference at the beginning between probate and versus a trust is if you have to go through probate, you have to get court approval to get access to funds, to get access to sell real estate, to get authority to do something. And right now, especially, with COVID-19, courts are open, especially in our area in Michigan, but they are behind for some of them. So it does take a little bit longer than you would think to get that approval. If you're a successor trustee, all it takes is for you to go to that institution, to the realtor, and show them in the trust that you are successor trustee. And now you have authority. You don't have to go through the court and wait weeks on end to get that approval. That normally is one of the bigger components in the beginning that we have to contend with if we're doing probate.
There's a word, Kendra, that you used a few times that I know I always use when I'm talking to people, and that is authority. Where does the authority to take this action come from? Mm-hmm. If you've got a will, the authority comes from the court. There's no authority inherent in the will. It's the judge will issue an order, and that's what gives you permission. Where with the trust, the authority is contained within the trust, and you as successor trustee can handle things. It's the same action, but where you get that authority and how it plays out can be very, very different.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then that's really what it is. You have to have authority. Otherwise you can't just step into someone's shoes once they pass. So you have to find that somewhere, whether it's through the court or through the trust. And it is a lot easier most times to do if it's in a trust.
Gotcha. So, is there, kind of a checklist or a series of operations you would say people go through? Is it the same for every case, or is it different?
There are a lot of similarities. There are certain things you have to do. I mean, obtaining death certificates, one of the first things you need to do, because you'll be needing them throughout the whole entire process. Securing residences if there's property, securing assets, making sure that everyone's notified and there's not money going out to some third party that you had no idea was taking money. But there can be differences too. You can have two siblings going 50-50 and beneficiaries. So that doesn't create as many steps along the way as if, say, you had 15 beneficiaries, which we do have some trusts right now that have upwards of 15. So there are certain things that are very similar, but there are other things that would be very different just depending on how the trust distribution.
Now, and Kendra, when we're talking, probate versus trust administration, with probate, there's really only cost involved if people are fighting, right? Because unless people, because if everyone goes along to get along, probate, you don't have to pay any fees or filing fees or anything like that if everybody's on the same page, right?
Half truth. So I would definitely say when you're dealing with probate litigation, meaning, someone's contesting something, they're saying, hey, look, this isn't right. You need to bring a judge in on this. That is obviously right off the bat going to cost you a considerable more amount than just going through what we call informal probate, meaning we get someone appointed pretty quickly without maybe a judge approval, just the clerk. We're doing paperwork because everyone's getting along. Even in those instances, you still have filing fees. You still have, even if you don't go through an attorney, there's an inventory fee that the county assesses. And it's based on what's in the estate. There's no controlling how much of it that's going to be. So you still have a considerable cost and time. A probate estate cannot be closed in the state of Michigan for 5 months at least. So you have some restrictions, whereas with a trust, for trust administration, if you get everything done in a month, you're done. There's no true restriction. It can be different, very different.
There's something my grandma always used to talk about was, when you're talking cost, you're really talking about three things: time, energy, and money. Cost, a lot of people think about it in terms of dollars, but time, energy, and money, I think, are all really valuable to consider, especially when you're talking about something like probate. if you're working, the court does not have evening hours. You'll have to take time off, or you'll have to hire an attorney to show up while you're at work. In addition to just the filing fees, the costs, and then, your own time that you're spending with it, as opposed to, as you said, with trust administration, you can do that at night if you feel like, it can be done on your time.
Exactly. Yeah. So it definitely, it's a weighing of options for those successor trustees, those successor, the personal representative for a probate estate. You really need to be thinking about, will this person have time to do it? So you want to make sure that they do have time.
Yeah. And so with that, Kendra, a lot of families will just appoint the kids in some order to be acting trustee, even though they know they have options, or maybe they don't. But can that child successor trustee, can they hire help? I mean, what does that look like? Because I know taxes have to be filed. There's things that need to be done. What can we help with? What can anyone help with?
Yeah. So when it comes to the successor trustees, unless there's language in the trust saying they cannot absolutely get any help, which I haven't seen any trust say that, but it could. You can hire any professional successor trustee, that whether that's a CPA or a tax attorney or a trust administration attorney like myself. We can assist with that. What that means, though, is the successor trustee is still the successor trustee. We're not taking on that role of serving in that capacity. We just get authorization from them to assist them. So I can get a limited power of attorney from the successor trustee to call the institutions, to get information from them, to do maybe some of the work that the successor trustee doesn't have time to do. And we really help clear those things up and make sure we have the trust administration moving along and doing things maybe during the day that they couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. I was going to say, I think that's a really good point, because there's an awful lot of people who would want to appoint one child or another or someone else, but they're like, you know what? They don't have a financial background. They don't have a legal background. They don't really need that, do they? To my mind, a good trustee is somebody who is diligent and has follow through, and who is also willing to delegate, when the time comes, if they need to.
Yeah, you don't have to have a legal background to do trust administration in terms of if you're a successor trustee. It definitely helps because, as I mentioned, there are certain things you have to do that may not be laid out in the trust. Notice to creditors. That's one of the first things that successor trustees ask me. Okay, well, what do I have to do for that? You have to post it in a legal news, but who do you go to for that? Those are just coming from experience from doing so many trust administrations and knowing where to go for those things. But you can hire professionals to help you who do this. So you don't have to have the knowledge. It is better, like you mentioned, diligent, someone who is going to, listen to what the grantor, the person who set up the trust, what they wanted and abide by those terms. But you don't have to know exactly every step of the way what to do.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of strikes me as the best of both worlds in a lot of situations. Instead of having somebody who's never done it before, just kind of making it up as they go along, versus other situations where you're paying a law firm or you're paying a bank to do it. I think for a lot of people, that's a pretty good balance. You've got the trusted person who's doing it, but then they can hire in the expertise where it's needed. Now, it also goes the other end of the spectrum where, how do I want to say it without disparaging anyone's family? But sometimes you don't necessarily have, that obvious choice. And in that situation, it might make sense to name a professional trustee. Would you say?
Yeah, it definitely does. When it comes to successor trustees, the more obvious answer anymore is using family members. But there was a point in time where a lot of people were setting these trusts up with even banks as successor trustees. We still see that, pretty regularly, I would say. Well, I wouldn't say regularly, but we do still see that happening. But you don't have to have a family member do it. One of the biggest reasons that people do that is, well, it's just going to them anyway, or they're not going to charge the trust very much for their services, so I'm going to do that. But in the long run, that might not be the best option. If you have a question of whether this person can complete the tasks that come with the successor trustee or not.
Mm-hmm. And I would say particularly in situations where we've got special needs trusts, where maybe there's drug or alcohol issues, where there are kind of those harder things to be done, do you necessarily want to put that on one of your kids, or would it be better to have this kind of outside third party, us, or someone else kind of doing that heavy lifting there?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just one of those things that definitely need to be discussed when you're meeting with your attorney to go over your choices for successor trustee. But it definitely helps to know even a little bit of what they might have to do at administration level to know that it's not as easy as cutting the check, as we have mentioned at the beginning. There are things that they have to do, like an inventory and accounting, and make sure that everything is on the up and up, really.
Very good.
Great. We don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but Kendra, we appreciate you being with us today. Just to kind of recap, if you have any questions about trust administration, you can reach out to the firm. We'd be happy to help. We can assist in trust administration if people so choose and need that help. I know me personally, I'm like homeschooling kids right now, trying to deal with everything. We're from home. I couldn't manage that right now. So I would definitely appreciate your help, Kendra. Also, another thing that we offer families is quarterly, we do trustee trainings. So we do a webinar to kind of just go over what does this look like so that families are prepared, so that they're not entering a time where things are very emotional and trying to figure out what needs to happen next. So we kind of offer those quarterly if anyone is interested in attending one of those. But go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate that last point that Mike made there, which is a lot of people, when they're thinking about it, they're thinking about how would I deal with this today, as opposed to how would I deal with it at that moment. And just realize that, if you're in that moment, you've lost a spouse, you've lost a parent, a sibling, somebody who's close to you, and it might be really difficult to go through all of this work. You should be spending your time taking care of yourself, making sure that you're processing things, that you are going through that process on your own and not getting bogged down in, tax code and closing bank accounts. There are people who can do that for you so you can focus on what's most important.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Pat. All right, guys, we will see you guys next week for another episode of the Pat and Mike Show. Again, Kendra, thank you so much for being on with us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Kendra.
Thanks.